Just looking at this brown, murky water, I do wonder what's actually in this river. This river that supplies well over 30 million people with drinking water. Neil here, and right now I'm standing by Germany's most iconic river, which is just a stone's throw away from my Deutsche Welle office here in Bonn. I'm at the Rhine. And there are barges going by right now. You can probably hear that there in the background. It is a very fast-flowing river, and it's rather broad. It's over 1,320 kilometers long and flows through 6 countries. That's Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Austria, France, Germany, and finally through the Netherlands and then into the ocean. It's a river that means so many different things to different people. It's Germany's biggest waterway, with an estimated fleet of almost 7,000 vessels shipping all sorts of commodities such as grains, minerals or fossil fuels. And if you're a tourist, you probably think of fairy tale castles and quaint wine villages, or the legend of the Lorelei. It's the romantic Rhine image that still exists, but there is another side to this river, and it's not so pretty, and that's the side of industry. And Germany's vast chemical industry in particular, for decades polluted this river, dumping pretty much anything into it, and this had catastrophic consequences for the ecosystem and also for the water quality. But we managed to turn things around, and the fish are back, and the water is on the whole pretty good these days. So what happened here? And what are the main challenges today when it comes to pollutants in rivers like the Rhine, which are crucial for our drinking water? That's what I'll be looking at in this episode. And so I'm going to head back to my DW studio now to talk to somebody who knows all about the Rhine and its water.
Morgen.
Morgen, Frau Stötter.
Ich habe vergessen, ich hole mir gerade noch schnell ein Glas Wasser.
Yeah, kein Problem.
Sofort
That's
nachgucken.
Tabea Stötter. She's an environmental scientist focusing on water quality with the ICPR, the International Commission for the Protection of the Rhine, that was formed in 1950 and was instrumental in transforming the Rhine from a very dirty river into a relatively clean waterway. Tabea's based in Koblenz, which is where the Moselle River flows into the Rhine River, so she's pretty much surrounded by water where she is. And as you just heard, she had a bit of a cough as we started the interview, so she had to fetch a drink to clear her throat. Before we actually get started, Tabea, you just got a glass of water, right?
God.
Is that water from the Rhine by any chance?
Yes, it is, because I'm only drinking tap water. And the tap water here is from the Rhine. Actually, it's only maybe half a kilometer away. There is a pumping groundwater close to the Rhine, and using it as for the tap water. So I'm drinking basically Rhine water, but not directly.
And how worried are you about that, the fact that you're drinking Rhine water, or aren't you worried at all?
No, I'm not worried. I think tap water is much more safe than all the mineral water you can buy in the shop. So I'm not worried. It is monitored, and
Because Germany has pretty amazing water purity laws, right?
yes, so you have to control it more than the mineral water. And actually, before we used to drink the tap water here, we also took a sample and let it analyze, and everything is okay.
Tabea, water quality. Can you perhaps explain, why is it so important in this river?
Yeah, I think water quality is the basis for, not say everything, but for many, many things. So the Rhine is used for drinking water for at least 30 million people in the Rhine catchment. So that's really a basis for our drinking water supply. So we need a good water quality to be sure to have drinking water for all the people in the Rhine catchment area. And so that's the basis for us, for us humans living in the Rhine catchment. But of course, water quality is also the basis for ecology. In the past, we had big problems, and the water quality was so bad that the fish couldn't live in the Rhine, and all the ecosystem was really damaged by water quality. So this is the basis. When we have a good water quality, or let's say not too bad water quality, then we can be sure that ecology can recover and we can have the drinking water from the Rhine.
You just mentioned 30 million. Just to put that into context for an international audience, that's more than a third of all Germans, right?
Yeah, so, but of course, that's not only Germany, that's also Switzerland, Netherlands, of course, all these countries depend on the Rhine, especially in the Netherlands. That's really an important topic because the water level is so high that they really use the Rhine water. So it's filtered by riverbank filtration, and then they use this water for their drinking water. So especially the Netherlands, really, really important that the water quality of the Rhine is relatively high to be sure that they can supply all their people with the drinking water coming from the Rhine.
They're in a vulnerable position, right? Because they're downstream, so they get all our dirt, right? Because I was also looking at some of the charts that you publish, and it looked like that, at the source, the water is the cleanest, and then gradually, it goes into the yellow, and then towards the Netherlands, it starts going into the red for certain substances.
Yes, that's really a problem, and that's also why I think in the 1950, I think the Netherlands were the first which said, okay, we need this international commission. We have to come together and improve the situation because they get all the dirt. Of course, we have a lot of densely populated areas in the Rhine catchment. We have a lot of chemical industry, pharmaceuticals industry, and the Netherlands get everything basically. But we also have this different situation, for example, for the migratory fish, because then Switzerland depends on all the countries in the lower stream. So the Netherlands have to take measures that the salmon can come to Switzerland, for example. But for water quality, of course, the Netherlands depend on all the other countries, Switzerland, France, Germany, etc., to take measures to improve water quality.
Okay, but in terms of ecosystems, it's not a one-way street. It works in both directions then.
Exactly.
That's
yes.
Interesting. Okay, I mean, if we look at, I mean, you just said it, in the catchment areas internationally, it's like 30 million people depend on the Rhine for drinking water, which is obviously treated. I mean, how do you feel about the fact that we've built so much industry along the Rhine? I mean, some of the biggest chemical plants in the world, right, are on this river, and it's such a vital source for fresh drinking water. I'd be worried about that, thinking just of how many chemicals might be going into the water. I mean, do we know for a fact just what they are letting into the water? Is it really closely monitored?
I totally agree. I'm also a bit worried, let's put it like this, because it's a big unknown if this chemical industry really affects the drinking water in a really big way. So I have two opinions on that. So first, we come a long way. We have this chemical industry since many, many years, and we had really big influences on the Rhine water quality. The Rhine was called the sewer of Europe because it was basically, everyone emitted everything into the Rhine. It was really, really dirty. So no one wanted to live at the Rhine because it was stinking. So it was changing the color. Fish were dying on a regular basis because chemical industry emitted really a lot of pollutants. So it was really, really dirty. And we come a long way and we changed the situation and it's much, much better. So that's really something you have to say. The investment into wastewater treatment plants was needed and it had an effect. We are in a much better situation, but it's not good yet. And we also have, I don't know if you will talk about this in the podcast, but there's the Water Framework Directive from the EU. And there's also the chemical status. And in the Rhine catchment area, we are not at a good status yet. So it is increasing. The water bodies which are coming into a good status is increasing, but still actually all the water bodies are not in a good status yet. And this is due to some substances which are really persistent. So we might have banned these substances already, but they still exist in the Rhine catchment area. So we might not have a problem at the moment, but these substances are accumulating. And at some point, drinking water production had to change their system. So when they have to use more intense cleaning procedures, drinking water will be much more expensive. And at the moment, we are a bit on this way because we are emitting, and some substances accumulate. And at some point, it might not be enough to use the groundwater close to the river, but at some point, we might have to treat this water with really intense techniques, and that will intensify also the costs for our drinking water.
And probably also the emissions, because that's then more energy intensive as well, filtering the water.
Of course, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But that, I mean, if we look at you said some of the substances, they're very persistent. I assume you're also referring to, because I remember doing, for this podcast, we did one episode on a chemical that accumulated in nature. It was PFOA, and it was in Bavaria near a chemical plant, a complex, Gendorf. And it was accumulating all around this plant in nature. It was in the air, it was in the rain, it was on the fields, it was in the animals. Is this something that you're also worried about, in terms of the Rhine?
Yes, this is one of the substances we are concerned of. The problem is that we have also chemical industry, for example, which are really big and on international level. And for some substances, we just need international agreements. There's one example, mercury. We also still have problems with mercury. It's ubiquitous substances, it's called. So it's just persistent and everywhere in the nature, and also in fish, etc. And but there we have an international agreement. It's called Minamata Convention, and this agreement has the goal to really reduce mercury and ban it in most of the processes. And for some substances, this is the only way to go because they are spread also internationally. So we cannot agree on the Rhine to ban it because that's not that will not change the situation dramatically.
So if we look at, you've formulated, or there are thresholds formulated, right, for a lot of these pollutants, that you shouldn't exceed a certain threshold. The levels of these contaminants, just how dangerous are they for our health?
That's a really difficult question because the problem is that all the legislations are not really harmonized. So if we look at the thresholds given by industrial laws, so the industry are permitted to emit certain substances to a certain threshold, and most of the time they are in these limits. Then we have the Water Framework Directive, where we are not below these thresholds yet. And then we have all the substances which are not under legislation yet. So we have a lot of substances where we don't have a threshold. And I think that is one point where we have to act. There are two ways to deal with that. So in Germany, we have a list of substances which are then have a permission to be emitted. And we should come the other way around and say, you don't have the permission to emit anything, only if you really can secure us that this has not a negative effect.
But it's like you're transferring the onus to the industry then. It's up to them to prove that what they are doing is safe. It's not up to us, the consumers, to prove what you're doing is harming us.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to say. Because at the moment, we are always one step behind industry. At least it feels like that. So I have to say that the Secretariat is neutral and we are just coordinating and we are just putting all the stakeholders together. But it feels like we are always one step behind the emitters. So it's not only industry, it's also, of course, all the pesticides coming from agriculture, etc., are also a problem. And we are always one step behind, especially chemical industry. They are emitting, I think they should know what they are emitting, but of course, they have their permissions with a list of substances, and the substances which are not on this list are not monitored and are not under control, let's put it like this. And there are more and more cases where our monitoring stations suddenly realize, okay, there's a substance, we haven't measured it before, but it's there, and it's there in relatively high amounts, and we don't know which effect it has. And we also have the problem, maybe we know what they emit, but then the substance is changing in the water. So it's kind of degraded and changing, but still it can be problematic. So we need to act there. So we've seen that we still have a problem with water quality. It's not like in the past that we have these big, huge loads of nitrogen, phosphorus, and heavy metals, but we have substances like micropollutants, like pharmaceuticals, pesticides, which can affect the water quality even in very low concentrations. So far, I think we don't have a high danger for the human health. I think there are there are many other things which are harming us much more, like the bad air quality in the cities, etc., have a bigger effect. So we are not at the point that we have to say human health is at risk because of the Rhine. I think we are not at this point, but we have to secure that we will not come to this point. So we have to secure that we can use the Rhine water for drinking water supply. And that's why we have to secure that the emitters fulfill their responsibility. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, determining the substance is, of course, one thing. But I mean, I'm just wondering if, let's say I were one of those major polluters out there who wanted to do it secretly, you know, and sort of get rid of my rubbish. I mean, how likely are you to actually trace this back to the source? How difficult is it when you find something to say, okay, we know exactly who's responsible for this and they're going to pay for this?
I think there we are quite good. So we had some examples in the past where we suddenly a substance popped up also by the screening techniques, and it took a while until it was identified. But then we have this monitoring net, and then you can see, okay, at this monitoring station suddenly it popped up, and we are in a country where, or the Rhine catchment, of course, everything is kind of known. So we know the emitters which are upstream of this monitoring station. So we know it had to be someone there. So far, the substances which popped up suddenly, there we could identify the polluters. It's getting more and more difficult to emit something secretly.
If we look ahead, you know, to the biggest challenges that you see with regard to pollutants, something that comes up quite frequently is microplastics. Is that something that you're concerned about with regard to the Rhine, or isn't that such an issue because it generally gets washed into the oceans anyway?
Yes, microplastic is something we are concerned of. Of course, the problem in the Rhine is not as big as in the ocean, but I think we also have to take our responsibility there. We cannot just say, okay, it's washed away, let's forget about it. That's not the way we are working. And I think it's also a problem for the Rhine, for the ecosystem in the Rhine, but we still have many unknowns with microplastics. So there are some numbers, but we are still at a low level of knowledge, let's put it like this, for the Rhine. So we still have to know more. What is really the load of microplastics in the Rhine? What are the effects of microplastics? So these are still many things also science have to figure out, and then we can act. So micropollutants are still a much bigger problem than microplastics, at least as far as we know at the moment. And just one remark, so micropollutants are not completely reduced in normal wastewater treatment plants. So this is something I want to make clear. So if we have a basic normal wastewater treatment plant, the pharmaceuticals are still washed into the river. So this is why we have our special program and why we said, okay, we need measures, for example, really investing into wastewater treatment plants so that they have an additional step to reduce these micropollutants. So we need investment there. So we cannot say our wastewater treatment plants are working good and are reducing all the contaminants. That's actually not the case. So we need to invest there.
But then it is a cycle then, right? So it's like the waste that, I mean, you just said it, like pharmaceuticals, we take medication that ends up in our bodies, we go to the toilet, it eventually is flushed to the sewage system, then it's let into the Rhine, and then we take it back again from the riverbanks, to get drinking water. Do these chemicals, the medication or the hormones or whatever's in there, does it come back to us then through our drinking water?
In a certain way, you're right, but in really, really low concentrations. So they are not affecting us. So far, we don't have this problem, at least. So it's more, at the moment, it's more a problem for ecology, that if it affects the aquatic organisms in the Rhine and especially also the smaller tributaries. But of course, we don't want any of that in our drinking water.
Yeah,
of course, it would be much better if it wouldn't be there at all.
Tabea, if you had a magic wand and you could just wave it and say, right, there's this one substance, I'm really worried about it. I really don't want this in the Rhine. And you could just say, it's gone tomorrow if you wave your magic wand. Could you single out one that you would really like to get rid of?
That's really a tough question. I don't have my favorite bad chemical, I would say. So the PFOA, I think they are really a group of substances which are really causing worries. If we could get rid of this whole group, that would be great. But I don't have my favorite chemical bad substance. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I want to get rid of all of them, or at least reduce them as much as possible. I know we cannot stop everything, but reduce would be great.
Tabea, perhaps just on another aspect to this, climate change is gaining momentum. A lot of things are happening around the world. How does this impact on water quality in the Rhine?
Climate change is affecting all the topics we are working on. So water quality, ecology, obviously. And for example, in summer, it just gets too hot in the rivers for some fish. So we have a problem there. Floods, low water, of course, are a problem. For water quality, we see, for example, the effect if we have long periods of low water, so dry seasons, then we have higher concentrations of contaminants. So they are always there. There is always let's say, the same load of chemicals of some substances in the Rhine, but normally they are diluted in the water. So if we have long phases of low water and we really have low water levels, then they are just concentrated in this water. And then we can get to concentrations which are problematic for us. A few years ago, we had really a long low water period. And then we had suddenly again a problem with chloride, which we hadn't for many years. And we also, for example, that happened for the first time, as long as I know, we really had our monitoring stations sitting on the ground, and they couldn't take any samples anymore because they was just sitting in the mud and couldn't really get water anymore. So, and some of them then went with really, so like old fashioned, with a bucket to the water and taking with a bucket a water sample. And maybe also one other aspect, the higher water temperatures can also change, of course, the dynamic in the water, what can happen with the chemicals, etc. But I think this low water and rising concentrations just because of the low water is one example which shows it really clearly how this affects water quality.
Tabea, then, I mean, if we were looking at this in an international context, rivers, they often cross borders, which is also why the ICPR was founded as an international body in 1950, right? What would you recommend, to other countries also outside of Europe who are grappling with, the water quality in their rivers? Is there like, a 5-point plan that you would recommend? This is the first step, and then you do this and this and this?
It's complicated to really have a plan to follow, but the most important thing I think is talking. So really communicating between all the partners, so all coming together and talking. So also for the Rhine Commission, it took years to achieve goals, and actually it also took disasters. So we had the big disaster of Sandos, where heavily toxic pesticides flowed into the river and caused the death of all aquatic life downstream for 400 kilometers.
When was this?
And in 1986, it was in Basel, or close to Basel, this happened, and this caused such a huge reaction also in the public that the whole work of the Rhine Commission changed. Then we changed to ambitious goals and had our programs to follow. So I would say when I could recommend something, the first is talking, coming together, having some patience. Sometimes it just takes some time. Then it's always good to have common goals, to really have a program to work on and have a goal, maybe connect it also with something nice. So we connected it with the salmon. We wanted the salmon to be back. So this was our huge goal. And actually the salmon is coming back. We can see it. So it took some time to also convince the society about what we are working on. And then when it came to this disaster, there was really the pressure of the public going on the streets and demonstrating and saying, we want our Rhine to be clean again. And of course, this was some pressure on the politicians, and this changed the discussion.
Tabea Stötter from the ICPR, thank you very much for joining me here with On the Green Fence.
You're welcome.
Okay, so time for my main takeaways, and as you can hear, I've come back down to the Rhine for this. First off, just looking at this river and just how majestic and vast it is, I think it's a huge achievement that we've managed to clean it up. Even if it still is to a certain degree polluted, but most of the thresholds, the industrial thresholds on substances are kept, as Tabea said. So we really managed to turn the tide on this river, and turning it from something that was really polluted and stinking and that nobody wanted to live nearby, and also with the fish dying off, etc. And today we're back on track to having a moderately clean river, and it's quite an achievement also, given all the shipping that's happening on this river. Something like 7,000 vessels operating on this river, transporting all sorts of commodities. And also all the industry that is still here, and if anything, it's probably grown. All these chemical complexes that we have also in North Rhine-Westphalia sprawling on the river. It's quite remarkable that it is as clean as it is, given how much industry is operating on it. So that is, of course, also owed to tighter regulation and thresholds, and holding companies accountable for what they do. And also the tracing and monitoring systems that we have in place, as Tabea mentioned, they're getting better and better. So nowadays, thankfully, nobody can just dump stuff in the Rhine, with impunity. They will be found out. That's the good news. The bad news is that, as Tabea acknowledged, there still are plenty of substances that we don't necessarily know about, partly because we're not looking for them, and partly also because chemicals can degrade into other byproducts that we may not have on our radar. So it's a bit worrying that we're still not absolutely sure of what exactly is floating around in this river, and we all have to keep a very close eye on it, that something nasty doesn't pop up and come back to bite us. So we will have to up the ante in future if what Tabea was saying, if certain substances accumulate in nature and they're very persistent, we're going to have to, invest more and more time and money into cleaning the water in future, to getting the same sort of quality that we're used to. So that is something to bear in mind. And also climate change tying into this. It's going to add to the burden. Particularly also, I thought it was interesting with how she said that in times of drought, the substances in the river, it's more intense, the level of pollution, because it's not as diluted, it's not as much water to dilute the substances. So something also to think about. But I think this is a very, very good example of how international cooperation, and this was a huge international effort, is the way to resolve environmental problems. It's the only way. The environment doesn't stop at borders, rivers don't stop at borders. And also thought it was very interesting how she described that, the ecosystem, it doesn't matter whether you're upstream or downstream, the ecosystem works in both directions. And she, brought this example of the salmon, which then migrates upstream. So no matter where you are on this river, you have a responsibility and a role to play when it comes to protecting the ecosystem and also guaranteeing safe drinking water for us humans. Yeah, that's my 2 cents for now. What's left to say? I think it's time to wrap up, right? Many thanks to my colleague and producer Natalie Muller and my sound engineer Gerd Georgi. And many thanks to you for listening to this episode of On the Green Fence. My name is Neil King. Take it easy and take care.